Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. We asked you all to send in some book excerpts that you'd like to hear us deep dive on,
Mhm.
and we saw a ton of requests to cover Atomic Habits.
Yeah,
So it seems like a lot of you are really thinking about how to improve those daily routines, build better habits, um,
heavily.
make those improvements really stick this time. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to be going deep on James Clear's book, Atomic Habits.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common struggle, right? We all have these goals, big and
Yeah.
small, but actually turning them into reality,
Right.
consistently, that's tough.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was really cool that Clear does in this book is he uses this analogy of an ice cube melting to show how those tiny, consistent efforts can lead to huge breakthroughs.
Ooh, it's such a good one, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like you're applying heat to that ice cube, and for a while it looks like nothing's happening.
Right.
But all that effort, all that energy you're putting in, it's all accumulating below the surface, and then suddenly
Yeah.
you hit a certain point, boom, the whole thing transforms.
Right. You hit that critical mass. So even when you feel like you're stuck in your progress, right, like you're spinning your wheels,
Yeah.
those consistent efforts, they are adding up, even if you can't see it yet. They're laying the groundwork for that shift to happen.
Right. It's about trusting the process.
Yeah.
And understanding that change often happens in leaps, not just those small increments. Think of any overnight success story you've heard.
Yeah.
Chances are there were years of consistent, effort behind the scenes before that breakthrough.
Right, it's so true. Like, you think of those athletes who suddenly become famous,
Right.
but they've been training intensely for years to get to that point. Now, here's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Claren argues that lasting change isn't just about changing your actions,
Right.
it's about shifting your identity.
Totally. It's about becoming that person, the kind of person who embodies that habit naturally.
Right. So instead of just saying, I want to save money,
Yeah.
you need to start seeing yourself as a saver, as someone who values financial responsibility.
Absolutely. If your actions don't line up with the identity you want,
Right.
it creates a conflict.
Yeah.
And that makes change way harder.
Mhm.
Imagine someone who wants to be a writer that spends all their time on social media.
Right. Yeah.
Their actions aren't matching their aspirations.
Right. It's like they're voting against themselves in a way.
Right.
So how do we bridge that gap then? How do we get those actions to line up with the person we want to become?
Well, Clear introduces this concept of habits as votes.
Okay.
Every action you take, it's like casting a vote for the kind of person you want to be.
Okay.
Such a powerful idea.
I like that. It makes even the smallest actions feel meaningful. So let's say, like if I want to be a morning person, each time I resist that snooze button, that's me casting a vote for that identity, right?
Exactly. It's a vote for morning person you.
Okay.
And over time, those votes add up. They start to paint a picture
Yeah.
of this new identity that you're building.
Right.
It becomes more real, more sustainable, and you actually start believing it about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to change any behavior,
Okay.
whether it's a good one or a bad one, you need to understand this thing he calls the habit loop.
Oh, the habit loops.
Yes.
Now I remember this.
This is key. It's a 4-step framework, so let's break it down a little bit.
Okay.
It all starts with a cue, a trigger that kicks off the whole habit cycle.
Okay.
So let's say you want to start reading more. Placing a book on your bedside table, that becomes a visual cue, a reminder to pick it up.
Right. So the cue in this case is the book itself.
Right. That, or even just the thought, oh, I should read more.
Okay. So it's not even necessarily a physical thing. It could be an idea or.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Got it.
The cue then triggers a craving,
Okay.
which is basically a desire for a particular outcome. In this case, the craving might be for relaxation, for knowledge, to escape.
Right. So the book itself isn't the craving, it's that feeling you get from reading it.
Right, it's the feeling you're hoping for. The third step is the response, the actual habit itself.
Yep.
Picking up the book and actually reading those pages.
Okay.
And finally, there's the reward, the positive reinforcement that makes the habit stick.
So the reward would be like the enjoyment you get from reading, or maybe the sense of accomplishment from finishing a chapter?
Exactly. Understanding this loop is crucial for changing any habit
Yeah.
because you can pinpoint the cues that are triggering the behaviors you don't want,
Right.
or you can create new cues for the actions you do want to take.
This is so helpful. It's like a roadmap for habit change. So how do we apply this to making those good habits more appealing, more likely to stick?
Well, that's where James Clear's second law comes in.
Okay.
Make it attractive.
Okay, make it attractive.
And guess what? Plays a big role here.
I feel like this is a trick question, but I'm going to guess dopamine.
Ding, 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 you got it.
Yeah.
Dopamine, that reward chemical in our brains.
Our brains love dopamine.
They do. And remember that study with the mice we talked about earlier?
Oh, yes. Remind me about that.
Well, researchers found that when they flooded the reward systems of mice with dopamine, every time they poked their nose in a specific box, those mice went nuts. They were poking the box hundreds of times every hour, just chasing that dopamine rush.
So it wasn't the reward itself that was so addictive. It was the anticipation, the wanting of that reward.
You got it. And we can actually use this to our advantage with this technique called temptation bundling.
Oh, yeah. Temptation bundling. I want to hear more about this.
Okay, so the idea is to pair an activity you want to do with something you need to do. So, like only letting yourself watch your favorite show while you're on the treadmill.
I've actually tried that one. It works shockingly well.
It's a classic. See, the more you pair those two activities, the more your brain starts to associate that need activity with something enjoyable. It's like tricking yourself into wanting to do it.
Right, you're hacking your own reward system. Now, another thing I think is so fascinating about habit building is the power of our environment.
Oh yeah, totally agree. Clear really emphasizes this, that our surroundings are full of cues that are constantly influencing us, often without us even knowing it. And visual cues especially,
Yeah.
those are incredibly powerful.
That makes total sense. So if I want to eat healthier, I should make sure those healthy snacks are front and center in my fridge while the less healthy options are tucked away out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. You're making the good stuff easier to grab
Right.
and those tempting things harder to reach for. Clear even gives this example of how they put stickers in the urinals at Amsterdam's airport,
Oh, yeah.
and it reduced spillage by 8%.
Wow. That's amazing. Simple tweaks to the environment can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Now, let's debunk this 21-day myth, which is still floating around out there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people still believe that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Clear is very clear on this. It's not about waiting for a certain number of days to pass. It's about repetition.
So it's not about waking up on day 22 with a brand new habit. It's about putting in those reps consistently.
Exactly. He points to a study where people who made really specific plans for when and where they would exercise, they call these implementation intentions.
Yeah.
And those people were much more likely to actually follow through.
Right.
It was having that plan,
Right.
not willpower, that made the difference.
So instead of just saying like, oh, I want to meditate more, I should be saying, I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes every morning at 7 a.m. in my living room.
Exactly. Define the when and the where.
Right.
It removes the guesswork,
Yeah.
you eliminate decision fatigue,
Yeah.
and it makes it harder to talk yourself out of it.
Right. It's like setting those guardrails up to keep you on track.
Totally. So you're not just relying on motivation, which comes and goes.
Right.
You're actually building those systems that make those good habits almost automatic.
Right. And I think that's a perfect segue into his third law, which is,
Make it easy.
there it is. You got it. Make it easy, especially when you're just starting out.
Yes. And one of my favorite techniques for that is the 2-minute rule. Oh, the 2-minute rule. Yes. It almost sounds too simple to be true, but it's so powerful.
It really is. So for anyone who hasn't heard of it, break it down for us. How does it work?
Okay, so the idea is you take any habit you want to build and you break it down into a tiny action that takes, you guessed it, less than 2 minutes to complete.
Right.
Want to start running? Focus on just putting on your running shoes. Want to write a book? Just write one sentence.
Wait, seriously, just one sentence?
Yeah, it sounds ridiculous.
Right.
But that's the point. It's about making that starting point so easy you can't say no.
It's like outsmarting your brain. Right. Tricking yourself into taking action.
Exactly. And once you've started, you're way more likely to keep going. You built that initial momentum.
Right. Small steps, big impact. Speaking of making things easy, I have to ask about Victor Hugo. Remember that story where he locked away all his clothes?
Oh, yeah. Victor Hugo, the ultimate commitment device. He was facing a deadline, really struggling to focus on writing.
Yeah.
So he had his assistant take all of his clothes except for a big shawl and lock them away. Literally made it impossible for himself to leave the house and get distracted.
Wow. That's some serious commitment. But it's a good reminder that we can all use these little tricks, these commitment devices, to make those good habits more likely.
Absolutely. So think about it. What are some of your biggest temptations, the things that derail you from your goals?
Well, I definitely have a phone problem. I spend way too much time scrolling.
Right. So a commitment device for that could be deleting those tempting apps
Mm-hmm.
or using one of those website blockers that prevent you from accessing certain websites.
Okay, I need to look into those website blockers. That sounds like a lifesaver. But what about those temptations that are harder to avoid? Like the bag of chips in the pantry calling my name.
Well, Clear would probably say make it impossible. If those chips aren't in your house, you can't eat them. Remove the temptation. Make those bad choices harder to make.
Right. Out of sight, out of mind. I like it. Now, one thing I've been wondering about with all of this is how our personality plays into habit formation. Are some people just naturally better at this than others?
That's a great question, and one that Clear definitely addresses in the book. He emphasizes that understanding your own tendencies and preferences is key to finding those habits that actually work for you.
Okay. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to building better habits.
Not a chance. What works for one person might be a disaster for someone else. It's all about self-awareness, knowing your strengths and weaknesses,
Right.
and tailoring your approach to fit.
That makes me think about like introverts versus extroverts. A habit that requires a lot of social interaction might be totally draining for an introvert, but energizing for an extrovert.
Exactly. You want to find habits that align with your natural inclinations.
Right.
So if you thrive on routine and structure, maybe you benefit from very specific schedules. But if you're more spontaneous, maybe you need to build in more flexibility to keep things interesting.
So it's not about trying to fit into some mold. It's about figuring out what works for you as an individual.
Exactly. Which brings us back to that idea of reflection, which we
Oh,
talked about a little bit before. It's not enough to set a habit and forget about it. You've got to regularly evaluate your progress, see what's working and what's not, and then make adjustments along the way.
so it's like having this feedback loop,
Yeah,
constantly refining your approach based on what you're learning.
precisely.
Hmm.
Clara actually offers some really simple but powerful questions to guide this process. He suggests asking yourself, what went well this week? And what needs work?
Those are good. They encourage you to celebrate those small wins and also identify those areas where you can improve.
Exactly. And the key is to make this reflection a regular practice, whether it's a daily journal entry, a weekly review, or even just a mental check-in a few times a week. The important thing is to be intentional about evaluating your progress.
I love how actionable all of this is. It's not just about some vague idea of self-improvement. It's about having a system for creating lasting change.
That's what's so great about Atomic Habits. It's a roadmap, a set of tools and strategies that anyone can use to build those better habits.
All right. This has been an amazing discussion. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
what's one key takeaway you'd want our listener to remember today? What's that one nugget of wisdom that can really make a difference for them on this journey?
Ooh, good question.
Yeah.
If I had to choose one,
Yeah.
it's this. Small changes, consistently applied over time, can lead to extraordinary results.
Mm,
That's really the core message of Atomic Habits.
right. It's easy to get caught up in wanting to change everything all at once.
Hmm?
But Clear's book shows the power of those tiny improvements, those 1% changes.
Absolutely. It's not about finding a magic formula or a quick fix.
Yeah.
It's about those small wins, those little actions
Yeah.
that might seem insignificant on their own, but over time, they build upon each other and create this ripple effect.
It's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant?
How do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Yes. Love that. Such a good analogy. So instead of getting overwhelmed by everything you want to change, focus on just one tiny habit you can start today.
Okay, what would you suggest for our listener? What's that one small action they can take right now to start building momentum?
Hmm. It could be as simple as putting your workout clothes by the door,
Okay.
unsubscribing from one email newsletter that's cluttering your inbox,
Uh-huh.
or committing to just 2 minutes of meditation each day.
Those are all great starting points. They feel manageable, but they pave the way for those bigger changes down the line.
Exactly. And remember, this journey of building better habits, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Right?
You're going to have setbacks.
Totally.
You're going to have days when you don't feel like it.
Yes.
But keep going. Keep experimenting.
Mm.
Keep reflecting. And keep refining your approach.
It's not about being perfect. It's about progress,
Right.
right? Taking those small steps.
Exactly. Embrace the process. Learn from your mistakes. Celebrate your successes. And enjoy the journey.
This has been such a great discussion. I feel like I have a whole new toolbox for creating lasting change.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress. One small step at a time.
So, dear listeners, we want you to think about that one tiny habit, that one small action you can take right now to start moving toward the future that you envision.
Yes.
What's one vote you can cast for the person you want to become?
Let us know. Share your chosen habit with us on social media
Yeah.
and tell us how it goes. We're here to support you every step of the way.
Until next time, keep those habits atomic.
The Goldilocks rule, huh? Is this like something to do with porridge?
Well, not exactly, but a nice warm bowl of porridge is definitely satisfying. It's more about finding that sweet spot,
Okay.
where a habit is challenging enough to keep you engaged, but not so difficult that you just get discouraged and give up.
Okay, yeah, finding that balance. But how do we actually do that? Like, how do you figure out what that sweet spot even is?
Well, think of it like learning a new instrument, right? If you start with pieces that are way too advanced, you're just going to get frustrated.
Right. Yeah.
But if you stick with super easy stuff for too long, you're going to get bored.
Right.
So the key is to find that level where you're challenged just enough to stay motivated and see that progress.
Okay, so it's like gradually increasing the difficulty as you get better, like leveling up in a video game.
Exactly. You master one level, you move on to the next. Same with habits.
Right.
Let's say you want to start running. You're not going to start by trying to run a marathon.
Oh, no, definitely not. I think I'd make it like a block before needing a break.
Right, exactly. You might start with a 15-minute walk, then gradually increase the distance or the intensity as you get stronger.
Okay.
It's about finding that balance where you're pushing yourself but not burning yourself out.
Right, I get that.
Yeah.
So what about staying motivated over time? Like, how do you keep from getting bored or just falling back into old habits?
Well, that's where this idea of what Clear calls the explore-exploit trade-off comes in. And this is something that applies to so many areas of life, not just habits.
Explore, exploit. Okay, I'm listening.
Think about it like trying new restaurants, right? At first, you're exploring, trying different places, different cuisines, figuring out what you like.
Yeah.
But once you find a few favorites, you might start, exploiting those choices, going back to those restaurants more often because you know you like them.
Right. Okay, so how does this apply to habits?
Well, in the early stages of habit formation, it's all about exploration.
Okay.
You try different things, see what sticks. You might experiment with different workout routines, try different productivity techniques or different morning rituals until you find something that clicks.
Right, like casting a wide net to see what you catch.
Exactly. But then once you found a few habits that really work for you, for your personality, your lifestyle, your goals, that's when you shift into the exploit phase.
Okay, so instead of constantly trying new things, you focus on mastering the ones that you know already work for you.
Exactly. It's about taking those habits to the next level, optimizing them, really weaving them into your routine.
Right. Going from dabbling to actually excelling.
I like that. Going from dabbling to excelling. It's like you've been the tourist, now you're becoming a local, you've explored the terrain, and now you're settling in, making it your own.
Yeah, I love that analogy.
Now, here's the thing. Even when you find those habits that work for you, that you enjoy, there are going to be days when you just don't feel like doing them.
Oh, tell me about it. Some days, the snooze button is just way too tempting.
Right? We all have those days. And even the most successful people, the most disciplined individuals, they have those days too.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It's not about never feeling resistance. It's about having the discipline to do it anyway.
So it's not about always feeling motivated. It's about showing up consistently.
Exactly. And that consistency, that's what separates the people who achieve their goals from the people who just dream about them.
That's so true. This makes me think about that idea from Clear about making good habits inevitable and bad habits impossible.
Yes. It's all about creating systems that support the behaviors you want.
Okay.
So instead of relying on willpower alone, which, let's be honest, can be pretty flimsy,
Right.
you set up your environment in a way that makes those good choices the easy choices.
So like setting up those automatic savings transfers so that saving money is effortless.
Exactly. Or using website blockers to prevent yourself from getting sucked into those time-wasting websites.
Oh, I need those website blockers in my life. But what about those temptations that are harder to avoid? Like, that bag of chips calling my name from the pantry.
Well, Clear's advice would be to make it impossible. If those chips aren't in your house, you can't eat them. You remove the temptation altogether.
Okay, out of sight, out of mind. I can get behind that. Now, one thing I've been thinking about with all this is personality. Like, are some people just naturally better at building habits than others?
That's a really interesting question, and Clear does touch on this in the book. He emphasizes that understanding your own tendencies and preferences is really key to finding habits that work for you.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Absolutely not. What works for one person might completely backfire for someone else. It's about self-awareness, knowing your strengths, your weaknesses,
Right.
and finding what fits you.
Okay, that makes sense. This reminds me of like the introvert versus extrovert thing.
Yeah.
A habit that involves a lot of social interaction that might be e- exhausting for an introvert, but super energizing for an extrovert.
Exactly. It's all about finding those habits that align with who you are. Like if you thrive on routine and structure, maybe you need really specific schedules for your habits.
Uh,
But if you're more spontaneous, you might need more flexibility to keep things interesting.
so it's not about forcing yourself into a mold. It's about finding what works for you.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the importance of reflection, which we touched on before.
Right.
It's not enough to just set a habit and hope for the best. You have to regularly evaluate your progress,
Yeah.
see what's working, what's not, make those adjustments.
So it's like this feedback loop,
Mhm.
constantly refining our approach as we go.
Exactly. And Clear suggests these really simple but powerful questions to guide that reflection process. He says, ask yourself what went well this week and what needs work.
Those are great questions because they prompt you to think about both, like your successes and the areas where you could improve.
Right. And the key is to make this a regular practice, whether it's journaling, a weekly review, or even just a mental check-in. Just be intentional about evaluating how you're doing.
I love how actionable and practical all of this is. It's not just some vague notion of self-improvement. It's like a system for actually creating change.
That's the beauty of Atomic Habits. It really gives you a roadmap, a set of tools and strategies that anyone can use to create better habits and ultimately a better life.
Yeah. It's inspiring, honestly. So before we wrap up this
Right.
section,
Okay.
is there like one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with? Just one nugget of wisdom they can apply to their own journey?
That's a great question.
Ooh, it's a tough one. There's so much good stuff in this
Yeah,
book.
I know, right?
Okay, if I had to pick just one,
Uh-huh.
I think it would be this. Small changes applied consistently over time can lead to remarkable results. That's really the heart of Atomic Habits.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in wanting to change everything at once, like a total life makeover.
Okay.
But what Clear really emphasizes is that it's those tiny improvements,
Right.
those little 1% changes that make all the difference.
It's not about magic formulas or overnight solutions. It's about those small wins, those tiny actions
Yeah.
that might seem insignificant at first,
Right.
but over time they compound and create a real ripple effect.
It's like that old saying, how do you eat an elephant?
How do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Love it. Such a good analogy. So instead of getting overwhelmed by everything you want to change, pick one tiny habit you can start today. Just one.
Okay. What would you suggest for our listeners? What's a good starting point? Something they could try right now?
Hmm. It could be something as simple as, I don't know, putting your workout clothes by the door so you see them first thing in the morning,
Okay. Yeah.
or unsubscribing from one email newsletter that's cluttering up your inbox,
Uh-huh. Yep.
or even just committing to 2 minutes of meditation each day. Just 2 minutes.
Right. Those are all great because they're small enough that they feel doable, but they can lead to bigger changes down the road.
Exactly. And remember, this journey of building better habits, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
You're going to have days where you don't feel like it.
Oh, for sure.
You might even slip up and fall back into old patterns sometimes.
It happens to all of us.
It does, but it's okay. The important thing is to keep going. Keep experimenting, keep reflecting, and keep refining your approach.
Right.
Don't give up.
It's not about perfection. It's about making progress.
Okay.
One step at a time.
Exactly. So embrace the process. Learn from those setbacks. Celebrate the wins along the way. And most importantly, enjoy the journey.
This has been such an inspiring deep dive. I feel so much more equipped to tackle those habits I've been wanting to change.
I'm so glad to hear that. Remember, you got this.
So, to all of our amazing listeners out there, we challenge you to think about one tiny habit, one small action you can take today
Yeah, one small step.
to start moving toward the future that you envision.
What's one vote you can cast for the person you want to become?
Share your chosen habit with us on social media and tell us how it goes. We're rooting for you.
Absolutely. We're all in this together.
Until next time, keep those habits atomic.